At my daughter's wedding, I was seated far from the family table, like a guest who barely belonged. Then my son-in-law stood up and toasted me, calling me nothing more than the sponsor who paid the bill. The laughter stung deeper than any knife. I kept quiet, but inside, I remembered what my late wife and I had planned years ago, something none of them knew. That night, as Travis raised his glass again, I smiled back, already holding the secret that would change everything. Do you want to know how my silence turned into the weapon that saved me? Stay with me until the end, and don't forget to subscribe and comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story reaches. The air inside the reception hall was heavy with the scent of roses and polished wood. Charleston's old halls always carried that kind of weight, as if they had seen more than enough families come together and tear apart again. Tonight was my daughter's wedding. Yet I stood in the corner like an outsider, clutching a glass of champagne that tasted flatter than the smile I forced onto my face. The chandeliers shimmered over silk dresses and tuxedos. Strangers toasted to love and prosperity. Someone, a man I hardly knew, raised his glass with a smirk and said loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "Here's to the sponsor of the evening." Laughter rippled across the tables. My name was never spoken. Just that word, sponsor, like I was no more than the checkbook that had kept this event alive. The sting of it clung to my chest, sharper than the champagne's bite. My late wife Marjorie would have stood beside me, her hand resting gently over mine, softening the ridicule. She wasn't here. She had been gone for years, and I had carried the burden of keeping our family afloat ever since. All those nights I worked extra hours, every sacrifice I made. They seemed invisible under the warm glow of the chandeliers. When I finally found my seat, it wasn't near the family table. A young usher apologized with a shrug, pointing me toward the far side of the hall. I sat near the kitchen doors, half hidden behind a floral arrangement taller than my shoulders. I could see Kendra, radiant in her gown, and Travis, her new husband, laughing with their friends. But no one looked in my direction. Guests whispered, their eyes darting toward me and then away again, as if my exile was a spectacle worth noting. The shame settled into me slowly, each whisper pushing me further into the shadows. As the music swelled and glasses clinked, memories crept in. Kendra's first steps on our porch, her late-night phone calls during college when she ran out of money, the bills I juggled, the retirement fund I bled to cover her tuition. Each memory was a bead on the rosary of my devotion. Yet tonight it was clear she had no use for them. What remained was a hollow space between the father I had been and the stranger I had become in her life. Across the hall, I caught sight of Travis leaning toward Kendra, whispering into her ear. She turned slightly, and her eyes flickered in my direction. Then she looked away too quickly, as if she had been caught in a secret she didn't want me to see. My stomach tightened. The humiliation wasn't just social. It carried an edge, a purpose. Something was brewing beyond the laughter and the music. Something I hadn't been invited to share. I raised my glass, forcing my lips into the shape of a smile. The crystal trembled slightly in my hand, though no one seemed to notice, across the room. Travis raised his glass too, his eyes locking onto mine. It wasn't a gesture of respect. It was a challenge, a declaration, in that instant. I understood what had been gnawing at me all evening. This wedding wasn't about love or family. It was about power, and I was in the way. That was the moment I realized. This wedding wasn't about family. It was about power, and I was standing in the way. The thought echoed inside me as I swallowed the last of the champagne. My vow was silent, but it hardened in my chest. I would not be erased. The night wasn't over. At home, a note waiting on my dinner table would soon confirm my worst fears. The laughter inside the reception hall buzzed like static, too bright and too careless for the storm turning over in my chest. Crystal glasses clinked. A band played something light in the corner, and every surface of that grand Charleston room seemed soaked in celebration. Yet Travis's stare cut through it all, sharp and deliberate, as if daring me to react. He leaned toward Kendra, whispered something at her ear, and both their eyes shifted away the moment I glanced up. I forced a small smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals, and turned back to my table. My hands rested flat against the linen, as if anchoring me to the seat I never truly belonged in. Then, right there, on the white porcelain plate set before me, a folded piece of paper waited, so out of place it froze me. My chest tightened. For a long beat I didn't move. Finally, I slid the note into my palm and unfolded it beneath the cover of my napkin. 5 words in scrawled ink leapt out. "You should stay quiet tonight." Heat climbed up the back of my neck. My fingers trembled, and I tucked the slip back under the napkin before anyone could see. The orchestra carried on. Couples twirled across the polished floor. But the world around me had changed. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't some clumsy prank. It was deliberate. A warning. Or a threat. I lifted my gaze. Kendra's eyes darted away, studying her wineglass too intently. Travis, meanwhile, raised his drink toward me with that sly grin, smug and knowing. He mouthed something I couldn't quite catch, but I didn't need to. His meaning was clear enough. He was in control. The room felt smaller, air pressing down on me, and for a moment I wondered who else knew. Which guest had walked by and dropped that note? Who had the audacity to lay it right there on my plate? Then a small hand tugged at my sleeve. I turned and found Elias, my grandson, standing beside me with those wide, worried eyes. "Grandpa," he whispered, careful that no one else could hear. "Why are they being mean to you?" The words cut deeper than the note itself. Innocence like that couldn't be faked. He had noticed. Children always notice. I swallowed hard, forcing a steadiness into my voice. "Don't you worry about me. Elias, just enjoy the cake." But inside, something stirred, part ache, part fire. His tiny voice had drawn a line I hadn't realized I needed. They wanted me silent, diminished, tucked away like some irrelevant relic. Yet Elias saw me, and in that moment, he gave me something stronger than humiliation. Resolve. I slipped the note into my jacket pocket, covering the movement with a chuckle at nothing in particular. Outwardly calm, inwardly bracing. I raised my glass once more and joined the cheer at the edge of the room. That warning wasn't a mistake, I thought, letting my eyes sweep over the hall. It was a message, and I intended to find out who sent it. The folded note weighed heavily in the pocket of my jacket. Every laugh that rippled through the room, every clink of silverware against porcelain, pressed harder against my chest. It wasn't just a scrap of paper. It was a reminder that this night, cloaked in music and celebration, hid something darker beneath the lace and flowers. I lifted a fork, pretended to savor the roast chicken, but the taste was ash in my mouth. Around me, the reception swirled in colors, champagne glasses gleaming, couples leaning close in whispered conversation. It all looked beautiful, yet it felt like a stage play, and I was the fool cast in a role no one respected anymore. The silence I carried inside throbbed with a steady ache. The orchestra shifted into a softer tune. Kendra's friends were gathered near the head table, their laughter high and careless, as if the weight of life had never touched them. I sat further away, my chair an island of stillness. My fingers brushed the edge of the note again, hidden beneath the napkin, its sharp crease cutting against my skin like a blade. The smile on my lips was practiced, worn like an old mask, but behind it, unease gnawed at me. Someone wanted me quiet tonight. Someone thought silence was my cage. The thought pulled me backward in time. To Marjorie. Her voice came unbidden, steady and warm. "Silence is not weakness," she once told me, her hand resting lightly on mine. It's strategy. You hold it until the right moment. I could see her face as clearly as if she were across from me at this very table. The night she said those words, the two of us were at the lawyer's office, drawing up the trust that would one day safeguard everything we built. She insisted on layers of protection, safeguards for the children, and, most importantly, a hidden clause no one but the two of us knew. "You have to be prepared," she whispered then, her eyes catching the light of the desk lamp. "Even family can surprise you." At the time, I thought her words a shadow of caution, perhaps even paranoia. But tonight, they struck like prophecy. My late wife had known. She had seen the outlines of greed long before I allowed myself to. I reached for my glass, and the cool stem steadied my hand. The memory of her was bittersweet, a balm and a wound all at once. She had been the anchor of this family. Without her, I was adrift in a sea of faces I no longer trusted. A movement across the room caught my attention. Old friends, men I'd known for decades, fishing trips, business deals, endless Sunday barbecues, turned away as I tried to meet their eyes. One whispered into another's ear, and though the music muffled their words, I caught fragments carried on the air. "Lost his touch. Doesn't matter anymore." The shame prickled hot along my neck. Betrayal wasn't just confined to bloodlines. It seeped into every bond I thought unshakable. I had once commanded respect in this town, in Charleston's circles of old money and reputation. Tonight, I was being quietly erased, piece by piece, from the stage I had built. I pressed the napkin against my lips, masking the tightness in my throat. How quickly loyalty withers when whispers take root. Then, movement again. Different this time. At the edge of the reception hall, Travis slipped through the glass doors leading to the veranda. Another man followed. The lawyer he'd been speaking to earlier during cocktails. I leaned back slightly, catching a glimpse through the parted drapes. A folder passed between their hands. Paper exchanged in a moment swift enough to be deliberate. It wasn't the kind of conversation a groom should be having on his wedding night. No joy, no spontaneity, just calculation. The laughter inside felt suddenly brittle, like the tinkling of glass about to shatter. Something in my chest tightened. This wasn't just about mocking an old man, or pushing my chair away from the family table. This wedding was a stage, and beneath its silken drapery, a trap was being set. I forced another sip of champagne, the bubbles biting at my tongue. Around me, the orchestra swelled. Guests rose for another toast, glasses catching the chandelier's light. But it wasn't music I heard anymore. It was the sound of threads tightening, a web being woven around me, one strand at a time, and I knew I was standing in the center of it. The clinking of glasses drew me back into the noise of the reception hall. Travis had stood up, champagne flute in hand, flashing that perfect smile that never quite reached his eyes. Guests hushed, leaning in as though his words mattered more than the vows spoken hours earlier. "To Lemuel," he said, pausing long enough to make sure everyone's eyes were on him. "The man who, well, let's just say, the generous sponsor who made tonight possible." Polite laughter rippled through the room. Some chuckled nervously. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to join in or glance away. My jaw tightened, teeth grinding behind a forced smile. I could feel the sting more than the wine sliding down my throat. Sponsor. That was the word he chose. Not father of the bride, not family, just a wallet. I remembered Marjorie's words echoing like a bell. Silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. My fingers pressed against the rim of my glass, steadying the tremor that threatened to expose me. Let them laugh. They wouldn't laugh forever. When the applause died down, I slipped away from my seat, cutting through the sea of silk dresses and rented tuxedos. I found him near the hallway that led toward the patio. Alone, checking his watch like he had better places to be. "You enjoy your little performance?" My voice was calm, almost too calm. He looked up, grin sliding into something closer to a smirk. Just calling it how everyone sees it. I'm not as blind as you think, I said, stepping closer, low enough so only he could hear. Travis leaned in, his cologne sharp, his tone sharper. Then maybe you should act like it, for your own good. For a moment, I imagined my hand around his collar, dragging him into the shadows, demanding answers. Instead, I stood still, letting the venom of his words sink in. His smirk never faltered as he turned and disappeared back into the crowd. When I returned to my table, my eyes locked on the empty space where the folded note had been. I froze. My hand searched the table, the napkin, even the floor beneath. It was gone. Someone had taken it. My pulse quickened, a rush of heat rising in my chest. Whoever it was had been close enough to reach my plate without anyone noticing, close enough to watch me squirm. The chatter of guests blurred into a low hum, like the ocean pressing against my ears. I wasn't just being humiliated. I was being played. Every move, every glance, every word was part of a game I hadn't agreed to, but could no longer walk away from. I looked for Kendra, hoping for some anchor, some sign of loyalty. She was at the head table, radiant in her white gown, leaning toward Travis and laughing at something Claudine whispered. When I caught her eye, she turned quickly, busying herself with her bouquet as though I hadn't existed. The ache in my chest was heavier than the note that had disappeared. My own daughter, the child I had raised, educated, protected, now unwilling to even meet my gaze. She was choosing him, choosing them, and with every passing second, I was being written out of her story. I lifted my wine glass once more, steady and deliberate, to anyone watching. I was calm, composed, the picture of a content old man. Inside, a storm raged. They had stripped me of my seat, my dignity, my daughter's loyalty. But they would not take everything. Not yet. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. They had mistaken patience for weakness and strategy for defeat. And as I swallowed that last bitter sip, I swore to myself, this battle had only just begun. The room grew quiet when I rose from my chair. My knees ached, but I stood tall, glass in hand, ready to honor Marjorie's memory and wish Kendra and Travis well. My heart beat steady as I thought about the words I wanted to say. Simple, heartfelt, a blessing for the future. I cleared my throat and began. If I may, tonight, as Kendra begins a new chapter, I'd like to remember the woman who, Travis's voice cut through mine like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed, his grin wide. Before we go on, I have a little something special to share. The crowd's eyes swung to him instantly, their laughter chasing his words. I was left mid-sentence, standing awkwardly, glass raised in the air. A few guests chuckled politely, unsure if they'd just witnessed a mistake or a performance. Heat flushed my face. I lowered my glass slowly, fingers tightening around the stem. It wasn't just interruption. It was deliberate. Back in my chair, I felt the wood pressing against my palms as I gripped the arms, anchoring myself. Marjorie's voice rose in my mind. Dignity is not in the noise, Lemuel. It's in how you hold your silence. Every fiber of me wanted to shout, to demand the respect a father deserved at his own daughter's wedding. But I swallowed the fire, burying it deep. They thought they could strip me of my voice, but silence didn't mean surrender. I reminded myself of the years I'd worked double shifts, the nights I'd gone without so Kendra could study, the sacrifices Marjorie and I had made. My jaw eased, not in defeat, but in resolve. The laughter at surrounding tables grew sharper, hushed whispers slipping through the air. I caught fragments. He looked so lost. Poor old man. I sat taller, refusing to let them see the sting. When I searched for Kendra's eyes, she looked away, her smile forced as she clung to Travis's side. Her silence spoke louder than words. Either she was complicit or too afraid to stand against him. My chest tightened. The daughter I'd carried on my shoulders, taught to ride a bike, walked down the aisle. Now she turned from me as though I were a burden. Betrayal carved deeper than any insult. Yet beneath the pain, a strange calm settled in. I thought of the note folded in my pocket. You should stay quiet tonight. Now I understood. It wasn't a warning. It was an order. Travis wasn't just humiliating me for sport. He was setting the tone. He wanted my voice erased, my presence reduced to nothing more than a shadow. Every toast, every glance, every staged interruption. It was all a campaign to silence me. But silence, used wisely, could be sharper than any retort. I breathed steady, whispering only to myself, "You may silence me tonight, but you will not erase me forever." Later, as Travis raised his glass again, the crowd followed with laughter and applause from across the room. His eyes flicked toward mine, mocking, triumphant. I lifted my glass as well, outwardly calm, the picture of restraint. But inside, a vow burned hotter than ever. That was the night my silence turned into a weapon I intended to use. The chatter around me swelled again, glasses clinking, forks scraping against fine china. I forced my lips into a smile, thin and rehearsed, the kind I had worn too many times tonight. My shoulders stiffened under the weight of those polite laughs echoing in the hall, each one masking an undercurrent of hostility. It felt as if every glance in my direction carried a message: stay in your corner. Old man, behind the laughter. My humiliation lingered like a shadow clinging to me. Being cut off earlier still burned. But I kept my head steady, reminding myself of Marjorie's words. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence could be power. So, I sipped my wine slowly, pretending to enjoy the evening, even as my chest tightened with unease. A sudden movement drew my eyes down. A groomsman, barely older than my grandson, leaned over my shoulder, his hand quick and discreet. He slid a manila folder onto the table in front of me, right on top of my dinner plate, as though it were just another part of the meal. No one else seemed to notice. My fingers froze around the stem of my glass. The folder sat there like an uninvited guest. My pulse picked up, with deliberate calm. I opened it just enough to see the contents. Legal papers, thick and neatly clipped, covered with signatures, lines, and bold lettering. Power of attorney documents. My name was there, in print, with lines waiting for my signature. The room blurred around me. My throat tightened as I understood the trap. This wasn't just about cutting me off or mocking me with toasts. Travis and Claudine were trying to strip me of control entirely. My fortune, my authority, the last pieces of my independence. They had timed this carefully, slipping the knife under the table while smiles and music masked their true intent. I folded the papers back quickly, sliding them under the napkin, pretending I had seen nothing. My heart pounded so hard I worried the table might shake with it. Still, I kept my expression steady, eyes forward, nodding politely as though I were listening to the speech at the head table. Inside, however, sorrow and betrayal carved deep lines. I remembered Marjorie again, her foresight, the way she had once warned me that the day might come when even our own blood would turn their ambition against us. She had insisted we lock away the true documents, the trust that no one else knew about. She had prepared me for this moment. I let that memory steady me. They thought they had cornered me, but they had underestimated the years of quiet preparation, the way Marjorie and I had built walls they could never scale. Silence now was not surrender. It was strategy. Travis leaned over, his cologne sharp, his voice a low hiss meant only for me. "All you need to do is sign," he whispered, lips curling into that smug grin I had come to know too well. "Then you'll never have to worry again." I turned my head slowly, meeting his eyes. My voice came out soft, almost gentle, but sharpened with steel. "I'm not worried," I said. "You should be." The smirk faltered, just slightly, enough for me to see irritation flash across his face, a crack in his carefully polished mask. That small victory filled me with a surge of quiet defiance. For the first time that evening, I felt something shift. The war between us wasn't looming. It had already begun. I sat back in my chair, glass in hand, my gaze locked firmly on him, around us. The laughter and music continued, blissfully unaware of the battle taking place at this table. They thought tonight would break me. They thought the papers would silence me, erase me. But I had lived through loss, through struggle, through decades of sacrifice. They didn't know I had been preparing for this battle long before they ever dreamed of it. The morning after the wedding, the house sat unnervingly quiet. Coffee steamed in a mug I hadn't touched, its bitter scent hanging in the kitchen while I stared at the tabletop. Sleep had been impossible. Travis's voice still crawled inside my head. That whisper, sharp as a blade. All you need to do is sign. Every echo of it made the silence heavier, as though even the walls were holding their breath. From the back porch, faint voices drifted in. I shifted in my chair and caught the words, "losing it" and "poor old man." My heart tightened. Peering out the window, I saw two cousins speaking in low tones, glancing toward the house. They noticed me watching, plastered on forced smiles, then turned away. The sting was familiar but still cut deep. Travis and Claudine had wasted no time. They wanted to paint me as frail, unfit, a shadow of the man I once was. Later that afternoon, a letter waited inside my mailbox. At first glance, it seemed routine. Bank correspondence, the kind I'd opened countless times. But as my eyes scanned the page, the world seemed to tilt. A transfer had been authorized in my name, my signature scrawled at the bottom. Only, it wasn't mine. The lines were too hurried, the curl of the R wrong, as if someone had practiced but never perfected the mimicry. The blood drained from my face. They hadn't just whispered rumors. They'd put ink to paper, carving out pieces of my life with forged authority. My hands trembled as I folded the letter. Rage swelled inside, hot and choking, but I forced it down. A rush of memory struck. Marjorie warning me years ago, her voice calm yet certain. One day, silence will protect us more than shouting ever could. I slipped the notice into a drawer and turned the key. Whatever storm they were brewing, I needed evidence, proof that their greed reached beyond words. By evening, Franklin dropped by. He was an old neighbor, the kind who'd watched my children grow, whose loyalty had never been in doubt. He leaned close, speaking in a hushed tone. "Lemuel, they're building a case to have you declared incompetent." His eyes carried the weight of the message. "It's not just talk. They're moving fast." The words landed heavier than any insult the night before. Declaring me incompetent would strip me not only of wealth, but of dignity, of every decision I could make for myself. It was betrayal dressed up as mercy, and it burned worse than fire. I clasped Franklin's shoulder, thanked him with a nod, and hid the turmoil boiling beneath the surface. That night, I locked the bank notice away again, whispering to the still air, "If they want war, they'll have it." My voice barely rose above a murmur, but conviction rang clear. Just then, the shrill ring of the telephone sliced through the house. I answered, breath tight in my chest. My attorney's voice carried an urgency I had never heard from him before. "You need to come in," he said. "There's something you must see." The morning air in Charleston carried a damp heaviness that clung to my skin as I stepped into the law office. The building was old brick, with creaking wooden floors that carried the weight of countless disputes before mine. My attorney, Mr. Carmichael, greeted me with a solemn nod, his desk already stacked with folders that looked too familiar. Something about the way he avoided my eyes set my stomach in a knot. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Mr. Reese," he said carefully, "there's something you need to see." The atmosphere pressed in. The tick of a wall clock, the faint hum of a ceiling fan. Every detail seemed sharper, like my senses knew a storm was coming. My coffee from that morning still sat untouched back at home. And now, Even the thought of a sip made me queasy. He slid a file across the desk. My fingers trembled before I even touched it. I opened the folder, and the words on the first page cut through me like a blade. It was a power of attorney document, dated just weeks earlier, granting full financial control of my estate to Travis Harper, my son-in-law. My name was signed at the bottom. The ink looked like mine, the loops of the letters, the tilt of the L in Lemuel. But I had never touched that paper. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay still, to breathe evenly. Fury coiled inside, hot and choking. But I remembered Marjorie's words. Silence is not weakness. It's strategy. I looked up at Carmichael, whose lips pressed into a grim line. "You didn't sign this, did you?" he asked. "No," I answered, steady but low. "And they know I didn't." The door behind me opened, and in walked Travis, followed closely by Claudine. Their faces wore that smug veneer I had seen too many times, the kind that said they believed the game was already won. Travis feigned surprise. "Lemuel, you're here already. Good. Saves us all some time." I didn't move. Claudine crossed her arms, her smile sharp as glass. "It's really for your own good. Managing money at your age, it's too much pressure. We're trying to protect you." The words hit like stones. Protect me. That was their lie. They weren't protecting. They were stripping me. I leaned back in the chair, folding my hands. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness," I said calmly. My voice was level, but the air shifted. Travis's smirk flickered. The door opened again. And in stepped Franklin, my old neighbor, his weathered face lined with both worry and resolve. Carmichael stood, almost relieved. "I asked Franklin to come," he said. Travis turned, eyes narrowing. "What's he doing here?" Franklin cleared his throat, his voice steady. "A few weeks ago, I saw you, Travis, with a notary outside the courthouse. You laughed about securing the old man's future. I didn't think much of it then. But now," he looked at me, sorrow in his eyes. "Now I see what you meant." For a moment, Travis's face drained of color, but he quickly forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous. He's confused. He's old." But the crack was there, visible to everyone. Claudine leaned in, whispering something venomous under her breath. Too low for the others, but clear enough for me to catch. "This isn't over." Carmichael straightened the papers and said firmly, "This document is fraudulent. We'll take it to court." The weight lifted from my chest just slightly, but I didn't let it show. I rose slowly, meeting Travis's glare with steady eyes. My heart pounded, but the silence between us carried more power than shouting ever could. As I walked out of that office, the heat of Charleston clung to me again, but it felt different, less suffocating, more like fire fueling my veins. This war was just beginning. The house had never felt so hollow. After leaving the law office, I returned to the quiet walls that had once carried laughter, Marjorie's humming in the kitchen, and my children running down the hallway. Now it was just the ticking of an old clock and the creak of wood settling in the night. Dropping my keys on the table, I lowered myself into the chair where I had shared countless meals with my family. The silence pressed down like a weight, heavy and suffocating. Every corner reminded me of sacrifices I had made, for my daughter's education, for her wedding, for every step of her life. And now all of it twisted into a bitter reminder of betrayal. The next morning, the phone rang again and again. Word of the confrontation at the law office had already spread like wildfire. By afternoon, it was clear where the family lines were being drawn. Some of my cousins didn't bother returning my calls. A few picked up but spoke with a clipped tone, rushing through pleasantries before excusing themselves. Even those who once leaned on me for advice now acted as though siding with Travis was the safer bet. Only a small handful, distant relatives with no stake in my fortune, offered genuine concern. Their voices, though soft, carried honesty. The fracture in the family was undeniable now. a canyon that seemed to widen each time the phone fell silent in my hand. Sunday brought the deepest cut. I walked into church, head held as high as I could manage, though the pews seemed to whisper as soon as I passed. Faces I had known for decades turned away or offered tight, uncomfortable smiles. Travis and Claudine's story had spread beyond the family. Neighbors, friends, even those I had once trusted looked at me with a veil of suspicion. They had painted me as fragile, a man in decline, a figure too feeble to manage his affairs. When old friends approached me, their words dripped with false pity. "How are you holding up, Lemuel?" they asked, like speaking to a patient in recovery rather than a man still in command of his own life. Each word landed like a stone against my chest. Yet I refused to flinch. I stood tall, forcing my jaw to stay firm. Humiliation burned in my veins, but I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Later that week, Franklin appeared at my door. His knock was softer than usual, as if he carried something fragile. When he stepped inside, his eyes searched mine with urgency. "Lemuel," he said quietly, "I thought you should know. There's a bank employee ready to testify. He's seen transactions linked to Travis. Things that don't add up." The words hit me like a rush of air after nearly drowning. For the first time in weeks, hope flared in my chest. It was small, a flicker, but it burned steady. The fortress Travis had built around his lies was beginning to crack, and Franklin's warning confirmed it. My anger did not fade, but it was joined now by something sharper: determination. That night, I sat at my desk, papers spread before me. My pen scratched across the page as I prepared notes for my lawyer. Every word a stone laid in the foundation of my defense. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like focus. Staring into the dark, I whispered to myself, "You thought I was finished. You were wrong." Just then, a sharp knock echoed through the house. It was late, far too late for casual visitors. My hand froze on the pen, the ink blotting the paper. The knock came again, louder this time, reverberating through the wooden frame of the door. I rose slowly, heart pounding. Whoever stood on the other side carried the next chapter of this war, and I knew in my bones the fight was far from over. The midnight knock rattled the silence of the house. For a moment, I sat frozen in my chair, pen still in hand, notes for my attorney scattered across the desk. The sound came again, firm but not frantic, rising slowly. I steadied myself, the weight of the last few days pressing heavy on my shoulders. When I opened the door, Franklin stood there, his face drawn and pale. He glanced over his shoulder before stepping inside. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Lemuel, it's worse than we thought." I gestured for him to sit, though neither of us touched the chairs right away. The house felt suffocating, the clock on the wall ticking too loudly. Franklin finally lowered himself to the table and pulled a thin folder from under his arm. His hands trembled as he set it down between us. "What's in there?" My words came out rough, almost a growl. He hesitated before answering. "Proof. Rumors are flying, Lemuel. They're saying you've lost your mind. But that's not all. Travis has been busy. He's got people lined up to swear you're unfit to manage your own affairs." The room tilted for a moment. I braced myself on the table, staring at Franklin as if the world had shifted beneath us. "You mean to tell me he's bribing people to call me incompetent?" Franklin nodded grimly. "And not just any people. Family acquaintances. Folks who've known you for years. He's buying their silence, or their lies." The words sliced through me. For a moment, I thought of Kendra as a little girl, running through the garden with ribbons in her hair. How had it come to this? My daughter standing beside a man plotting to erase me entirely. Franklin opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of documents, bank statements with transfers I didn't recognize, signatures scrawled at the bottom, my signature, or what looked like it. I traced the ink with my finger, cold fury creeping through me. That's not mine, I said flatly. I know. Franklin replied, but to anyone else, it could be. He's good at this. Too good. I leaned back, chest tightening, anger burning hot but quiet. He wants everything, not just money. My name, my dignity, my life's work. Franklin placed a hand on my arm. Steady but firm. You can't let him win, Lemuel. We'll fight this. But you need to be ready. They're trying to break you down before you even step foot in a courtroom. The folder lay open between us, its contents screaming betrayal. My mind flicked back to Marjorie. Her voice echoed in memory. Silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. After Franklin left, I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, the folder still on the table. The house was too quiet, every creak of the floorboards magnified. I picked up my pen again and began to write. Not just for the lawyer, but for myself. Notes of everything I remembered. Every detail of Travis's smirks, Claudine's whispers, Kendra's silence. If they wanted to challenge my sanity, I would drown them in truth. The words poured out faster than I expected. With every line, resolve hardened. My wife's memory guided me. Protect what matters most, she had told me once. And now I knew, protecting myself was protecting her legacy. Morning came with no rest. The knock at the door startled me out of my chair. This time, it wasn't Franklin. Through the window, flashing lights cut across the street. Police cars parked outside, engines idling. My heart hammered as two officers walked up the steps. Their knock was polite, measured, but heavy with authority. When I opened the door, one of them adjusted his cap and spoke carefully. Mr. Reese, we've received a formal complaint regarding your condition. We'll need you to appear before a judge. The world narrowed. Formal complaint. Condition. Words meant to strip me of control. The very words Travis had planted. I steadied my breath. When? Soon, the officer replied. Days, not weeks. Behind them, across the street, I caught sight of a familiar figure. Claudine stood with her arms folded, lips curved into the faintest of smiles, cold, satisfied, as if the sight of the police at my door was her personal victory. I forced myself to meet her gaze without flinching. The anger rising inside was sharp but clear. They thought this would break me. They didn't know the fight in walking through the courthouse doors. The echo of my cane against the marble floor sounded louder than I wanted it to. The weight of the building pressed down, each polished column reminding me that I was here not as a guest of honor, but as a defendant in the eyes of my own family. Whispers rippled through the crowd gathered inside. Neighbors, acquaintances, even some relatives. Each glance a mix of pity and suspicion. Across the courtroom, my daughter Kendra sat with Travis, her posture stiff, her eyes carefully avoiding mine. It struck me harder than any blow that she had chosen to sit beside him, rather than offer even the faintest acknowledgement of the father who had raised her. The silence between us stretched heavier than the high ceiling above. The judge called the room to order, and soon Travis's lawyer rose. His tone was calm, rehearsed, dripping with false concern. He laid out a thick packet of papers, holding it up as though it were sacred. Your Honor, he began, we have evidence that Mr. Reese is suffering from mental decline and can no longer manage his affairs responsibly. The courtroom leaned forward as the first witness stepped up. My heart dropped. It was Harold Benton, a man I had once trusted, someone who had eaten at my table, he claimed, under oath, that he had noticed me confused in recent weeks, forgetting simple details, showing signs of deterioration. Every word twisted reality into a blade. The murmurs in the room deepened, cutting into me more than the accusation itself. I clenched the handle of my cane until my knuckles whitened, resisting the urge to shout. When it was our turn, my attorney stood with calm precision. He questioned Harold on specifics, exposing contradictions in his story. Slowly, the cracks appeared, Dates did not align. Conversations he claimed to have had with me were proven impossible by simple facts. The tension shifted slightly. Then Franklin stepped forward, steady as always. He produced documents that revealed suspicious financial transfers tied directly to Travis. The evidence landed like stones tossed into a still pond, sending ripples of doubt across the courtroom. For a moment, hope flickered. Yet my gaze returned to Kendra. She was called to the stand next. My chest tightened as she walked past me, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The lawyer asked her whether she believed her father was capable of managing his own life. She hesitated. Her lips parted, but no words came for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. I think my father has been unstable lately. The words nearly broke me. They were not shouted, not cruel, but whispered with the weight of someone torn in two. I studied her face as she spoke. I saw my little girl, the one who once clung to my hand at the fair, now standing apart, her loyalty fractured. My heart ached, torn between fury at her betrayal and sorrow at the chains Travis had wrapped around her. She tried to steady her tone, but her eyes betrayed the truth. Doubt, regret, pain. The judge called a recess. The gavel struck once, and the room dispersed into low chatter. As I rose, weary but upright, a figure brushed past me in the aisle. A folded slip of paper was pressed into my hand. I kept it hidden as I walked out into the corridor. When I opened it, the message was short and sharp. Meet me tonight. I know the truth about Travis. The words burned into me. Someone out there held a piece of the puzzle that could change everything. For the first time that day, amidst all the humiliation and betrayal, a spark of cautious hope lit within me. This battle was far from over. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polish, the kind of scent that carried decades of stories in its walls. I walked through the heavy doors that morning with my cane tapping against the floor, each step echoing in the marble hallway. My heart beat steady, though underneath the calm surface I carried the storm of the last weeks, mockery at the wedding, forged papers, whispers that I was senile. Today, that storm would find its end. The night before, the anonymous note had led me to a trembling young man, a junior accountant from Travis's own firm. His hands shook as he placed the files in mine. I can't keep quiet anymore, Mr. Reese. They made me move numbers that didn't belong to them. Offshore accounts, fake authorizations, all under your name. His voice cracked as he looked me in the eye. I'm sorry. The weight of the papers felt heavier than gold. Proof at last, not only of greed, but of premeditated theft. Walking into court, I felt both vindication and sorrow. Vindication that truth had finally surfaced. Sorrow that it took a stranger's courage to reveal what my own blood had tried to hide. Inside the courtroom, I settled into my chair beside my lawyer. Across the aisle, Travis sat upright in a dark suit, his jaw tight but eyes brimming with smug confidence. Kendra sat beside him, head bowed, not daring to meet my eyes. My lawyer opened the file with deliberate calm, and the air seemed to thicken. Your Honor, he began, we present newly obtained evidence, internal financial records showing direct attempts by Mr. Travis Holloway to transfer Mr. Reese's assets into offshore accounts. The room gasped as copies of the documents were handed to the judge. I watched as the color drained from Travis's face. For the first time, the mask slipped. He leaned toward Kendra, whispering something sharp, but she shrank back, pale and trembling. Travis's lawyer scrambled, objecting, but the judge cut him off. Objection overruled. The authenticity of these documents will be verified, but they already establish substantial fraud. My lawyer pressed on, pointing to signatures, my forged ones, and transaction trails leading directly to shell companies tied to Travis. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his schemes. When the judge turned to me, asking if I wished to speak, I rose slowly, gripping the cane that had become more than support. It was my anchor. "Your Honor," I said, voice steady, "silence can be strength, but silence can also be mistaken for surrender. I did not surrender my dignity, my mind, or my fortune, and I will not." The gavel struck. "The court finds in favor of Mr. Reese. Assets are secured. Mental evaluation denied. Fraud charges to proceed against Mr. Holloway." For the first time in weeks, my lungs felt full. Across the room, Kendra burst into tears. Travis slammed his hands on the table, red with fury, but the fight had drained from him. He knew it was over. Outside the courthouse, as the autumn sun cast long shadows, Kendra approached me. Her face streaked with tears. She whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. I was weak. He made me believe things about you that weren't true. Her words broke, and she covered her face. I stood still, the ache in my chest deeper than any wound. Betrayal leaves scars no judge can erase. Yet, looking at her trembling hands, I saw the little girl I once carried on my shoulders. "I cannot erase what you did," I told her softly. "But I can pray you find your way back to being my daughter." Her sobs echoed down the courthouse steps as I turned away, walking toward the quiet that awaited me at home. That evening, I sat at Marjorie's old desk, the envelope she left me resting under my fingertips. I whispered her name, thanking her for foresight, for love, for strength that outlasted betrayal. The fortune was intact, my dignity secured, but the family I once dreamed of was fractured. Some battles, even when won, leave ruins behind. Looking out the window at the fading light, I spoke aloud, not to the empty room, but to whoever might need to hear it. A fortune can be stolen, but a man's dignity only if he surrenders it. I fought back, not for money, but for the right to stand tall even when those I loved betrayed me. For elders across this country, betrayal by one's own blood can be the deepest cut. But standing firm, refusing to yield your voice, your mind, your worth, that is how dignity is preserved. And as the last rays of sun slipped below the horizon, I leaned back, breathing in the quiet peace of survival and the bittersweet taste of justice.